everybody, and welcome to the SoxProspects.com podcast. This is the only source on the internet for information on the Boston Red Sox farm system for you to put in your eardrums. This is episode number 123, our 2017 draft review with our special guest, Jim Callis of MLB.com. It's Jim's fourth time coming on the show, and he's always a great guy to have on the show to talk draft or anything really about the farm system. He's been covering the Red Sox farm system for longer than we have, and he's one of the few people that can truly say that. So he's a fountain of knowledge, got some really great stuff with him. Can't wait for you guys to hear it. Thank you for the download or the stream, everybody. My name is Chris Hatfield. I'm the executive editor of SoxProspects.com. Coming to you from the Sox Prospects Mid-Atlantic offices here in our nation's capital. No Ian today. We're just talking draft, and Ian's going to be back next episode, and we'll have plenty to talk about. Ian just saw Jay Groom's return to action in Lowell, so we'll talk about that and any number of other things that come up between now and then, including perhaps some news that I just got wind of that hopefully by the time you hear this will have already broken. So if you hear this, make sure you check out the news page at news.soxprospects.com and check out the site's Twitter at SoxProspects. Check me out at SPChrisHatfield. Check out Ian at Ian Cundall. That's IANCUNDALL. We're going to get right into the interview with Jim this episode, but first some housekeeping. One way that you can support the podcast is to subscribe, rate, and review. We're on iTunes, we're on Stitcher, Google Play Music, and YouTube. Yes, Firefly the Cat thinks you should do it too. Subscribe so you know when a new episode is up, and give us a 4 or a 5-star rating and a good review if you want to help us get in some new ears. Also, speaking of supporting the podcast, you can support us on patreon.com/SoxProspects. Guys, the support on Patreon has been great so far, and we're really excited to see it keep growing. Again, if you don't know how it works, you donate a small amount per episode. It's $1, $2, and $5 are the 3 tiers we have, or you can do different amounts, but you get rewards based on the level you donate per episode. You can see the rewards on the site. But as we do each show, I want to thank our $5 and up contributors. That's Cody Pimentel, Sox Signatures, Lindell Martin, Kirby Miller, Gerardo Iantosca, Kyle Costigan, Tyler Woodrawall, and Jeff Trainer. Thanks to them and all of our contributors. The list gets longer every time I read it, it feels like, and that's the idea. So thank you so much to those guys. Thank you to the Ludlow Thieves for our intro music. Go check them out on iTunes, Amazon, Spotify, or however you listen to your music. That song in particular, our intro and outro music, is called All the Money, one of my personal favorite songs, irregardless isn't a word, but regardless of the fact that they allow us to use it on the show, which is great. Yeah, Firefly loves that one too. We love getting your emails. We had some emails that I asked to Jim and some conversation from our forum at forum.soxprospects.com. But we love getting your emails. Send those to podcast@soxprospects.com. We want to talk about what you want to hear about, so send us your questions and your comments. Finally, I mentioned the site's Twitter is at SoxProspects. I said mine and Ian's already, so I'm not going to bother you with that again. And like I said, check out the news page, news.soxprospects.com, for all the info you need on draft signings, daily game recaps, our twice-weekly notes columns, and Ian and Chaz's scouting stuff. Thinking of some new stuff that we might be able to get up on there soon as well. So make sure you check out the news page. I think that's everything, everybody. So I think without further ado, we're going to throw it to my interview with Jim Callis. Like I said, Jim's always great to have on the show. Longtime friend of the website, and I swear we don't have him on the show just because of the generous kind words he has to say about the website whenever we have him on. I swear we're not paying him to say that. So we hope that you enjoy. I hope you enjoy listening as much as I enjoyed talking to him. Here is my interview with Jim Callis. Okay, and we are now joined by one of our second ever, fourth time podcast guest, Jim Callis of MLB.com. Jim, it is always a pleasure to have you on for what is now, I guess, our regular draft wrap-up podcast. It's always great to get you on and get your take on the system. Welcome back.
Yeah, no, I'm glad to be back. I love the site. I use you guys' site a lot. I mean, I think I say this every time I come on the show, that if fans of other organizations would be very lucky if they had the equivalent of Sox Prospects, because the level of detail and you guys going out to games and the access you guys get, it's your guys' website is a great resource. And I have to ask, though, who is the other four-time guest on the podcast?
Oh, it's if I gave you 3 guesses, you'd probably only need one, but Alex Spear. is the other one.
I wasn't sure if it was somebody with the team or if it was.
No. Well,
if it was somebody in the media.
Well, let's get into it then. Just coming off of the 2017 draft, everything's in the books. We actually have a first couple of signings in. The Red Sox announced a couple of the college seniors, and Tanner Nishioka from Pomona Pitzer, and Jordan Wren, son of Frank Wren from Georgia Southern, have both signed and been assigned to Lowell. Hearing some rumors on some other guys signing too, but I guess we'll start as we always do at the mile-high level. Seemed like a pretty good draft haul for the Sox, especially maybe in those first 5 or 6 rounds. Was that kind of your take? And I guess looking at what they were able to get, the whole portfolio this year, seemed like a pretty strong draft. Was that your take, or did you have a different take?
No, I thought so. I mean, when you're picking 24, the bad news is you're picking 24. The good news is, A, you had a good season the year before, but B, you're going to get a guy who is probably higher on your draft board that you wouldn't necessarily expect to get to you. And it's like, we couldn't quite get you MLB Pipeline's #1 rated prospect down in the draft this year like we did last year with Jake Groom. But
right.
But Hunter Green at 24 would have been nice. But Tanner Houck at 24. I mean, I'm sure if you asked the Red Sox coming into the year, before the college season, high school season all started, you can get Tanner Houck in the first round. He'll be sitting there for you. I bet they would say, okay, sure, we'll do that. We don't even need to go out and scout. And I think the consensus in baseball was they wished he'd had a little bit better spring. But I also think his velocity does the same thing every year. At the beginning of the year when it's cold in Missouri, it's down a little bit, and then it picked up toward the end of the year. And I think what hurt him a little bit at the end was he got knocked around at the SEC tournament. And that was the last impression he left on people. But, I mean, this is a guy who I think most people thought would probably be a top 10 pick coming into the year, and they got him at 24.
Yeah, it seemed like, at least as far as where he was ranked and what you saw from him coming into the year and during the year, it seemed pretty standard Red Sox pick, right? A guy who maybe if you did the draft in January may not have been there, like you said. It seemed Mike Rickard on the post-draft conference call was very excited about the pick, liked where they got him. But at least on the broadcast, I know a lot of the questions I was getting from people were saying, well, they just drafted a kid that profiles as a relief pitcher. Tanner Houck, in your estimation, is it the future reliever that a lot of people seem to take away from the broadcast, or is this a guy that's got a chance to stick in the rotation and seems like he's at least going to start that way?
I think you got to give him a chance to stick in the rotation, and I don't mean the Red Sox. I mean fans got to give him, credit for being better than that. I mean, look, there's a guy on the team right now who throws from a real low arm slot, and when he was drafted, everybody was like, "Oh man, that guy, it's not going to hold up with that delivery, and he's so skinny, and it's a definite reliever look." And, Chris Sale's been pretty good, and I'm not saying Tanner Houck's going to beat Chris Sale because I don't think his secondary pitches are as good as Chris's. But I just think it's real easy to take any low slot guy and say, "Oh no, he can't be a starter." But you know what? Madison Bumgarner kind of slings the ball from a low angle too, and he's been pretty good too. Now I know, I'm comparing him to two of the best starters in the big leagues, and they're both left-handed. But I wouldn't rule it out. I mean, look, he can really pitch off his fastball. I mean, when he's right, it's 92, 96. He's hit 98. It's got sinking and boring action on it. When he keeps down the zone, it's pretty unhittable. And if you do hit it, you're just going to beat it into the ground. So, the issue for him is, he can get the slider can get sweepy because he's not always on top of it. He needs to use his changeup more often. But I mean, you can probably say about a lot of amateur pitchers. This is a guy who can really, really pitch off his fastball. So to me, yeah, you wish the secondary pitches were better right now, but at the same time, in college you're going to go with what really works, and there's times too when the slider's nasty. So I don't know. I guess I get a little irked. I mean, not at you, but just this thought that, here's the thing, and I'm no pitching expert, but I've been covering this stuff for 30 years, and I've seen guys with great deliveries, supposed great deliveries, get hurt, and I've seen guys with bad deliveries get injured. Bad deliveries stay healthy. Like when I started covering this stuff, Kevin Napier had about as bad a delivery as you'd think, and he lasted forever. And I always tell people the worst delivery, or worst head whack at least, I can ever remember seeing in person was Max Scherzer in the fall league. And how it got compared to Max Scherzer coming out of high school, and even a little bit now. I don't think they're super similar now. But as a Missouri guy with a less than stellar delivery and a good first-round arm, there's some parallels. But anyway, when I saw Max Scherzer in the fall league after the fall after he signed, every scout I talked to said some variation of you got to put the guy in the bullpen and rush him to the big leagues and get what you can out of him for 2 or 3 years because he's going to blow out. And you just got to expedite him to the big leagues so he doesn't waste his pitches in the minors. And I don't think Max Scherzer's ever had an arm injury. So my only point is, yes, you want, good deliveries and good mechanics, and people don't like the low arm slot. But I also don't think anybody really has any clue. There's no one way to throw that keeps people healthy or makes them a starter. It just depends on the guy. And I think with how the fallback is, if you had to make him a reliever, this might be a guy who sat like 94, 98 with really nasty life too. I think he'd be a really good reliever. So you're not talking about this is a guy who's a third or fourth starter, and if you put him in, if you had to put him in the bullpen, he's like a sixth inning guy. This would be a guy who'd pitch in the eighth or the ninth. So I like the pick, and I will give him credit. I think he's got more of a chance to start than people just immediately write him off because he's got the low slot.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, too, because I think Peter Gammons actually wrote an article today on his website that quoted Mike Rickard and talked a little bit about this, about, comparing it to, say, Mark Pryor, who had the, oh my goodness, picture-perfect mechanics, will never get hurt, and then look what happened with him. It was the exact opposite. He lasted essentially 5 years before the injuries got him. So I guess while we're talking about pitching, maybe it makes sense to skip ahead to the fourth-round pick of the Red Sox, another college right-hander in Jake Thompson. Started the first game of the College World Series on Saturday. To me, looked like may have been a little bit too amped up. The control wasn't really there, but it also, to my non-scout, non-expert eye, wasn't exactly the cleanest set of mechanics ever either. It seemed like he's a guy who they maybe haven't even made up their mind on whether he's going to start or relieve coming out of college. Fourth-round pick for Jake Thompson there. You guys had him at number 71 on the MLB rankings, MLB pipeline rankings, and he got picked at the 131st pick. So is it kind of a similar sort of track where it's guys who may not have the best mechanics, maybe not the best delivery, but have a track record of succeeding, at least this year, in Thompson's case, as I think a first-team All-American, and they'll just kind of let him get out there on a major league or minor league mound, major league mound, professional mound, word I'm looking for, and just see what he does. Do you see any kind of correlation there in those picks, I guess is what I'm asking.
Maybe. I think it's similar. What's interesting with Thompson, and we split up the country half and half, Jonathan Mayo and I, and he's got the West. So I didn't really talk to a ton of people about Jake Thompson, but he was a guy like I would have thought people would have liked more than they did. We're talking about a guy who can go 93, 95 and touch 98 as a starter, and he's got a hard slider and he can flash a solid changeup. He cut his walk rate this year. I think he simplified his delivery. With him, I think what works against him a little bit was he missed most of, I guess, what would have been his sophomore year with a back injury. I was trying to do the math here because he's a redshirt junior, and he's old even for redshirt junior because I think he'll be 23 in a few months. So I think that probably worked against him. But I think it's pretty good stuff. A lot of success at a high-level program. That team's 55-4.
Right.
And again, what's nice is it's a big enough arm. This isn't a guy who's throwing 90-92 as a sinker slider guy, and if he can't make it as a starter, you're getting like a middle reliever. I do think there's some parallels. It's one of the better fastballs you're going to see from a college starter. His slider's his slider's better and more consistent than Houck's. I do like the parallels there. I hadn't thought about that way, but I think that is pretty accurate.
And actually, come to think of it, Jim, another thing that I had noticed, at least on days 1 and 2, the Red Sox drafted 4 pitchers between the 2 days in Tanner Houck, Jake Thompson in the 4th round, Alex Scherff, the 5th rounder out of high school in Texas, and Zach Schellinger, the right-hander out of Seton Hall in the 6th round. All were top 200 prospects on MLBpipeline.com, and I'm pretty sure all 4 of them had at least a 60 fastball in the grades.
Yeah, because Scherff's 93, 95, and he's touched 98. And Schellinger's kind of when you saw him. He was kind of like 94, 97 on the Cape last summer, and he's been kind of inconsistent this spring. It was more the low 90s. But all those guys, I think have touched 97 or 98 at some point.
Mm-hmm. And I guess the question that a lot of our listeners will probably be asking is, the president of baseball operations for the Red Sox has a certain reputation for liking right-handed power pitchers. Do you think that that's maybe trickled down a little bit, or is it just happenstance that that's how it worked out, that those are the pitchers they grabbed on days 1 and 2?
It's a good question. I mean, Dave Dombrowski's been around for a while, so I don't think he's necessarily – obviously he's involved in the draft, but I don't think he's as hands-on the draft as other GMs might be.
And certainly not day 2, right? I mean, he's involved, it's day 1.
And the thing is, too, if you look at these guys – I mean, not that people draft off our rankings, but we had Jake Thompson ranked 60 spots higher than the Red Sox took him. Mm-hmm. We had Scherff ranked 109 spots higher than the Red Sox took him. Schellinger about where we had him, but he had some biceps tendonitis this spring, which has some teams a little bit worried. But so, I think even if you weren't predisposed to like velocity or hard throwing right-handers, these guys, at least in our mind, represented exceptional value for where they got them. So I would think they would have stood out, even if you had you liked everybody the same, every demographic, every type of prospect, that those guys would have jumped out as perhaps the best available.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting. All right. I guess while we're talking about the pitchers, let's jump to Alex Scherff, who, as the 5th round pick, as you mentioned, was ranked by you guys in MLB Pipeline as the 52nd best draft prospect, and that was pretty much a consensus range for him across all the publications' rankings. Slot value for that pick is just under $300K. Reports coming out of his local paper today that he has apparently agreed to sign for about $700K. If that is true, and we'll throw that out there as a potential situation. We don't know one way or another. Do you think that that's good value for Scherff there? Is it, both on field and just as a potential tough sign, so to speak, for the Red Sox in the 5th round there? Is that a good get for them?
I think it's a really good get. I mean, I might have guessed, if you asked before the draft, I would have probably bet the over. I would have bet the over on 700,000 if that number's accurate. That said, last year, all told, 300-something picks in the first 10 rounds, only 2 guys didn't sign. And you aren't generally taking guys unless you know what it's going to cost to sign them. Even in the 5th round, if they don't sign Scherff, they lose $300,000 out of their bonus pool. So, there are going to be, a handful of guys who don't sign this year. But for the most part, if you're going on the first or second day of the draft, you're going to sign. So I just think that was probably some really good scouting by the Red Sox to figure out, hey, we can squeeze him in. I haven't broken down how I think they're allocating their bonus money to which guy where. Mm-hmm. That's about $400,000 over slot, which isn't a backbreaker. I think you could. I don't know what their pool is off the top of my head, but I would think the 5% would come close to covering that anyway, so they wouldn't lose a first-round pick. But anyway, and then they did draft some seniors in rounds 8, 9, and 10 to help pay for that too. But I just think that's good scouting to find out. Hey, you know what? We can take this guy in the 5th round to sign him. And you're talking a guy who. His makeup gets dinged because he's transferred. He would have played at 4 schools in 4 years if the public school transfer rules hadn't prohibited him from transferring again this year. So he played at only 3 schools in 4 years. He went back to the school he was at for his freshman year. And so some people weren't in love with the makeup. He's also a little bit old. He's 19 and I think about 4 months right now. And some teams look at that. But, you're talking about a guy who's 6'2", 210, 93, 97 most of the times. Holds his velocity, and he's got a really good changeup. Some guys are giving a plus changeup that I've talked to. The field of spin isn't tremendous. My guess is that means he'll probably wind up with a hard slider instead of that curveball. Mm-hmm. But that's not a 5th round arm. That's a 2nd round arm. And I think that's a very good get for the Red Sox.
I guess jumping back then to the actual 2nd round pick for the Red Sox, they drafted Georgia high school outfielder Cole Brannen at 63 overall. You guys had him rated as the 68th best prospect in the draft, so it seems like about right for where he was, where you guys expected him to go, or at least had him ranked. I guess those are 2 completely different things, but good pick there. What are your thoughts on Brannen? The slot there is $993K. Seems like, do you think he's maybe a little bit over slot, under slot, or right about there?
I would think he'd be in that neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I think this is another guy that if you had asked the Red Sox at the beginning of the year, you can get Cole Brannen in the second round. Would they? Well, let's make a deal. We'll give you Cole Brannen in the second round, or you can go out and see what's available. I think they would have taken Cole Brannen because Brannen had a chance to go in the first round. He didn't have a great spring. It wasn't awful, but it wasn't a great spring, and his stock dipped a little bit. But, I mean, this is a guy who's a well above average runner, steal bases, plays center field, good instincts in the outfield too. And he's got some hitting aptitude. I mean, he's not just a slap and go guy, but he's also not taking a big cut and swinging for the fences. He knows what his game is, to get on base, but he's got some bat speed and some pop. I think I wrote that, this guy's, ceiling, Brannen's ceiling could be, 270, 12, 15 homers and 30 steals and play good center field. That's a pretty good player. And I always like when I'm looking at high school position players, whether it's a speed guy or power guy. I mean, not that this isn't obvious, but I always feel better if the guy has hitting aptitude. I mean, it's great if you can, fly, but if you can't hit, that's, it's not going to help you. Or you can crush the ball in BP, but if you can't hit, you're not going to play in the big leagues. And this is a guy who's shown hitting aptitude. So I think that was a good get. I mean, and just to go back to Scherff, if you told the Red Sox you have Alex Scherff in the fifth round, or you could go out and see what's available, I think they would have said, yeah, we'll definitely take Alex Scherff in the fifth round. So I think they kind of have a draft. Like if you had put this draft together for them back in January, you would say, come on, it's not realistic they're going to get all those guys, but they did.
Mm-hmm. I guess just to kind of round out the first 5 rounds, Jim, and then we've got some email questions from our listeners. But Brett Netzer from UNC Charlotte was the third-round pick at number 101. Maybe a potential to sign for a little bit under slot. You guys had him ranked at 197 on the top 200 list. Seemed like a second baseman with a little bit of feel to hit. Do you think that might be a spot where they save a little bit of money, or is that about solid for a third-round pick there?
Yeah, they maybe could. I mean, it's hard to say too. I mean, they may have liked him more than we did. Mm-hmm. It's a third-round college junior. I mean, I'm sure they spoke to him again before they signed him. So, I'd be speculating. I don't know what his asking price is,
sure.
But I mean, I think what jumps out for him is, I mean, he's a second baseman who's got really good bat speed from the left side of the plate, and he's also very disciplined. So you think this guy's going to hit and he's going to get on base. It's kind of a line drive swing. It's going to be more gap power, I think, than homers. The rest of the game is it's average run. It's a below average arm. He's played left field. He's played second base. Not the most. He's been a little erratic defensively, I guess is the best way to put it. Mm-hmm. Maybe he could be an average second baseman. I mean, he got a lot of comps because they were both from the Carolinas to Tommy La Stellas. Is that guy who can second baseman can really hit for average. That's going to be the one area where he stands out, and he is similar in that regard.
All right, well, let's go to some listener questions, Jim. And our first question is from Lendell Martin, who's one of our patrons on Patreon.com. Thank you for your support, Lendell. And he asks, I was wondering who are the most interesting prospects to follow who were drafted after the 10th round. Aaron Perry was the guy I heard the most about after the draft had concluded. For what it's worth, Jim, nobody in the MLB pipeline top 200 after the first 10 rounds for the Red Sox, but certainly some interesting guys. Anyone that strikes you off the top of your head that you remember from the Red Sox draft after that went on day 3?
There's a couple guys. I mean, Garrett Benge is a guy who put up just crazy numbers in junior college a couple of years ago, was on our top 200 a couple of years ago, had an okay sophomore year when he transferred to Oklahoma State, hit better this year. I mean, he's a literal all-bat guy. I mean, this guy might have to be a DH, but he's shown some aptitude for hitting and hitting for power. You mentioned Perry, who's kind of a crazy profile where he's sub 6 feet, but he's hit 95 and he can snap off a pretty good breaking ball too. So he's a little guy with a big arm. He's kind of interesting. Just scored Donny Diaz at 23. He's out of San Jack. And again, I don't know what these guys eventually said signability-wise. He's interesting, although I think his asking price was a little bit, I don't know, I guess ambitious would be the best way to put it.
Okay.
So I don't know if he's signable, but he's listed at 6'2", 230. So he's your classic square-bodied reliever. But I didn't see where his numbers wound up after he went to the Junior College World Series where the ball flies. But like about a month ago in the season, or a little less than a month ago in the season, he had a 0.39 ERA and more than 2 strikeouts per 9 innings. And he's mid-90s with a real hard slider up to 85, late and tight. I got a Juan Garrett comp on him. I don't know if he's signable.
Okay.
Maybe. Charlie. Now there go my dog, as we predicted.
Right.
Charlie Madden, who's a guy they will sign. He's a senior sign out of Mercer, catcher. Yep. He's got some power, and he can catch a little bit too. He's not. I'm actually kind of surprised he went that low because. I guess there's a difference of opinion on guys, which happens. But, I think there's a chance to catch and a chance to hit for power there. And I would have thought that could have been a guy that somebody might have popped for $5,000 in the 9th round when you're trying to save money.
Right.
Yeah, my dogs, I don't know what's going on outside
It's
here.
okay.
So,
don't worry about it. They're used to the cat.
Down. Yep. So those are probably the 4 guys that jumped out the most to me. Mm-hmm. Outside of Charlie Madden, I'm not sure how signable those guys are. Although, not that you lose the pool money, but like if you're taking Garrett Benge in the 13th round, my guess is you're going to sign him. So he's probably signable. Perry is a high school kid in the 14th round. I have no idea what his asking price is. So that one, we'll see. But those are some of the interesting names there at the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just for what it's worth, based on some of the reporting that's come out so far and our editor-in-chief, Mike Andrews' own sort of speculation and reporting, we've got Benge signing, Perry is a potential overslot late, and don't have Diaz signing. Apparently, some local newspaper reported that the team had given him some sort of deadline of this weekend to accept their offer, whatever that means. My guess is my guess is that was probably more of a this is the price if you sign this weekend, and then we'll talk later if you don't want this now, rather than an actual deadline.
That makes more sense.
Yeah,
that makes more sense.
I was thinking
I don't know why you would just cut him off. Like I said, I heard, the number I'd heard would have been like kind of early 5th round money. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if, again, I haven't crunched the numbers to figure out how the finances will work to where you give him that. Right. But also, like the scouts I talked to liked his arm, but they basically always put it like, look, he's a junior college reliever, and it's not a good body. Mm-hmm. Like, generally, to get that kind of money, you're going to have to go to Texas where he's committed and do it again.
Right.
And then you might get that. So it'll be interesting on him.
Right. Our next email comes from Bob, and Bob asked, we kind of narrowed down his thoughts to a couple questions that are related, and one is, what is the threshold that, looking in the past, that you would have for a draft to be considered successful? So, like, what would you hope to get out of it? And then kind of the related question is, over a period of years, what's kind of a reasonable success rate using that standard for a team so that, if you hit more often, it would be that you're drafting very well, or if you hit it less often, you might have kind of maybe a prospect bubble where, there's a hole in your system coming up because you've missed out on your picks over a certain period of time. So just what are you hoping to get out of a given year's draft?
Well, this is going to sound like it's not very much, but it's just kind of realistic. If you go back and look at drafts as a whole and you just focus on the players who sign, not giving credit to guys out of high school who become stars after going to college, a typical draft might have 6 to 8 guys you would consider kind of consistent stars or superstars. And then you might have another dozen or 2 players who are regulars, whether it's in a lineup or in a rotation or at the back of the bullpen, say for 5 or more years. And then other than that, you're going to get guys who are up and down, who have a good, maybe a breakout year, but then don't live up to it or hang on as a complimentary player, get a cup of coffee. But realistically, when you're looking at draft, like players who are regulars for 5 or more years, there's some drafts where there aren't even 30 of those guys. So even though this sounds crazy, if you get one of those guys, you're probably doing a little bit better than average. And if you get 2, then that's a really good draft. I know that sounds crazy, but if you go back and look, I'll sit there and play around on Baseball Reference and sort by WAR, and you'll see. I mean, you get down to like for instance, I did this year. They had me redraft for MLB.com. Mm-hmm. I had redrafted. I think it was the 2000. I've been doing so many stories. I already forgot what it was. I think it was 2000.
I think it was the draft that Rizzo was in. Would that have been 08? maybe?
Yeah, here it is. Yeah, it was 2007. 'Cause it was
7,
10 years
okay.
ago. Exactly.
Right.
So, like, I had the Madison Bumgarner versus David Price argument, who would go 1, who would go 2, and Josh Donaldson 3, Giancarlo Stanton 4, Freddie Freeman 5, Anthony Rizzo 6. Okay, that's all good. And then, but you go down by the end of the first round. Here are my last 6 picks in the first. These are guys who, now that we know 10 years later, would be your first-round picks. Stephen Vogt, who was a 12th rounder at the time. Josh Kallmenter, 15th rounder at the time. Steven Souza, who is having a better year this year, and you might move him up a few slots if he keeps this up and repeats the performance, but he was a 3rd rounder. Nate Jones, who was a 5th rounder. Sean Doolittle, who's a supplemental 1st rounder. And Tommy Hunter, who's a supplemental 1st rounder. I mean, Tommy Hunter was the 30th best player in that draft.
Right.
And the Yankees picked 30. He was actually better than the guys the Yankees took, which was Andrew Brackman. But if you told somebody, hey, this is what you're going to get at pick 30, again, I don't know why I'm on let's make a deal mode. Like, would you take this or leave it?
Right.
You might say, oh, Tommy Hunter, come on. That guy's been, like, mildly useful. And But, I mean, Tommy Hunter's been in the big leagues for about 8 years now. And that's as good as it gets. So, anyway, get back to the question. I mean, if you get a star out of the draft, like the year, I mean, I know they got more than him, but the year the Red Sox got Mookie Betts in the 5th round, that alone's a good draft right there. Like, you've already, like, exceeded all but a handful of teams with just Mookie Betts. And if you just got 2 regulars out of a draft, you'd also exceed it. And I will say one other thing I've picked up, just when you look at this stuff, is no matter who you want to say the best scout or scouting director or scouting staff is in the game, nobody has a good draft every year. It just doesn't work that way. And I think it's kind of similar. I mean, I think that's true of every sport. It's just the nature of drafts. And, I know MLB, it's interesting. I've never done this story, and I guess I just never get around to do it, but I've wanted to. I think there's this perception that the MLB draft is a lot tougher than the NFL draft, the NBA draft, because you're projecting guys farther in the future. But I think if you actually look at how good the players are, like if you focus on players who become good rather than who doesn't or doesn't make it, I don't think it's any different. Just the difference is when Jamarcus Russell sucks, he still plays in the NFL. If Brian Taylor wrecks his shoulder, he doesn't get to the big leagues, and it looks like this horrible pick. If Michael Alcondi's terrible, he still is going to play in the big leagues for a while people try to figure it out. And the baseball equivalent, that guy gets stuck in AA and doesn't get past there. So I don't think it's that radically different. But really, if you get 2 useful players out of a draft, then you're doing pretty well. Like by useful, I mean like guys who can play a major role for multiple years. It's just very hard to do.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting. I know you mentioned this on the MLB Pipeline podcast too, but if you look at number 29 on your 2007 list, Sean Doolittle was drafted as an infielder, and now he's a relief pitcher. So it just goes to show you.
And he's been hurt a lot too. Like he and Nate Jones, it's like they'd move up, but they've been hurt. I mean, but I just think you'd floor people. Like if you told people at the time, hey, Stephen Vogt's going to be the 25th best player in this draft. This guy just got drafted in the 12th round. And Josh Kallmenter in the 15th round is going to be the 26th best player in this draft. People have been like, come on. Like, what are you talking about? But that's the reality of the draft. It's tough. So, the hauls where you get, like, the Red Sox in 2005 or 2011 where you have a bunch of early picks and you hit on them all, those don't happen very often. And I do think, I mean, if you could trade picks – which you really can outside of the competitive balance picks. I mean, I think the best strategy really would be to do what teams do in the NFL, and the Patriots do this a lot, which would be basically to trade down and try to amass more picks because it's just, it's more darts to throw at the board.
Our last listener question, Jim, comes from Austin, and he asks, it seems like in the first 50 picks or so, there was a larger run on first base prospects than I can remember in the past several years. Has the position changed to the point where athletic first basemen have gained more value than in the past? Does this shift elevate the news of a Nick Longy type within the industry, or elevate the views of Nick Longy, not the news? I think it probably has more to do with the draft class than anything, but what's your take on that?
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. I mean, it was a weird draft in that, if you break the draft into demographics, college, high school, hitter, pitcher, and you got the 4 demographics, there really wasn't a strong suit. Like everybody, like as you might imagine, I do a number of radio shows and podcasts related to the draft, and I get asked that question a lot before draft. Hey, what's the strength of this draft? And my standard answer was, there really isn't the strength of this draft. I mean, it was supposed to be college pitchers, and Tanner Houck was one of about 7 or 8 guys who could have gone the top 12 or 13 picks coming in the year, and it didn't work out that way. But I said if you want to go to a specific position, a specific demographic, the one position that's stronger, that really stands out as strong and usual, is the position that scouts are going to be the least excited about, and that's first baseman. I mean, we had 4 guys go, I think, in the top. It depends on what you count Brannen as, and the Rays did draft him as a hitter primarily. But I think that's 4 first basemen, the top 17 picks, and there were some others who went on the first day. I just think that was more. It wasn't like teams. It's the new market inefficiency, or hey, we got to get a first baseman. It's just in this draft, those were the best players. As you kind of the guy Bob, I think, or Austin alluded to. When we talk about athletic, Evan White might be able to play another position. Brendan McKay's kind of, could be this unique two-way guy, or at least he can get a chance to develop like that. Pavin Smith and Nick Prado, we'll see, but you could at least entertain the thought of playing them in the outfield. So these aren't like these guys aren't Mo Vaughn,
right.
or where they're limited to first base, or it's not that. These guys could possibly play other positions too, but it was just reflective of this year's draft as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, thank you, everybody, for the questions. One last thing that I wanted to chat with you about, Jim, and I had emailed you about this beforehand to kind of prep you, but we had a really interesting discussion start on the forums, on the message board on Sox Prospects, about this idea of why hasn't any team just gone into the draft one year and said, you know what, screw this bonus cap, screw the penalties, we'll accept them. We're just going to go in and spend whatever amount of money it takes to take the best player available at every pick and sign him. Obviously, a team would blow through their draft cap if they did that. And we actually had a poster on our message board go through and take the best player available who was there at every pick the Red Sox had, and just to kind of show what we would wind up with. Interestingly enough, the Red Sox still drafted Alex Scherff in the 5th round, which was pretty funny. But you wound up with a really interesting look at what the first 20 rounds would look like. And I guess just the initial question is, as compared with the international market where teams, I think pretty much every team before the new CBA kicked in had blown through their international cap once, or at least most of them did. What's different about the draft beyond, I guess, the obvious one being that you can't go get, 3 of the top 10 picks because those guys are getting drafted and the draft is dispersing talent. But other than that, what is keeping a team from just going in one year and saying, screw it, we're just going to sign everybody we can get our hands on, and we'll accept the fact that we're not going to get a first-round pick of each of the next 2 years?
I think that there's a number of reasons. One, as you pointed out, the main thing is it's not like it's an open market and you can just go out and get all the top players. I mean, in the scenario that your researcher laid out, I mean, they're getting the 15th best player in the draft in the first round, and then it's 29, 39, 48, 52, 53, 54, 55, 58, 66 through the 10th round, and then from the 74th through the 118th best player on our list from 11 through 20. So you're really not. I mean, you're getting a mid-first rounder, an end of the first rounder, and then a bunch of second round and third round and fourth round talents, which would be nice to get. So that's one thing. 2, to sign all these guys, you'd probably be spending $30 million.
And that's before penalties, right? That's before
there wouldn't
the
be a
taxes.
penalty in the draft.
Well, the taxes.
Well, no, I'm sorry. You're right.
Yeah.
You would pay the tax. So if you sign all these guys, if we throw in the tax penalty, it's probably closer to $60 million. Plus, you're losing first-round picks for the next 2 years. Mm-hmm. And the problem is, like on the international market, it's just money. But like you said, if I want to go out and sign the top 4 players for $20 million, I can get the top 4 guys. Just like now, if in the draft system, if I could go out and get Mackenzie Gore and Kyle Wright and Royce Lewis and Hunter Green and Brendan McKay, I'll get all 5 of them, and I can give those guys $30 million. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd probably do that. Because those are all top of the draft guys. When you're getting up future first round picks too, there's no protection. Like what if my team, like look at the Red Sox, they went from winning the World Series to finishing last place. You might be giving up a pretty nice pick.
Right.
And I just think like it comes down to the ceiling. You wouldn't be getting enough ceiling for to make it worthwhile. I think I don't think we're ever going to see a team give up a first-round pick on purpose. You might have some kind of snafu, maybe, that
right.
led to that somehow. But I don't think teams are ever going to consciously. The only way I can see this happening, it's the incredibly far-fetched scenario, is if you had, it would have to be like a transcendent talent, like, say, Steven Strasburg or Bryce Harper, one of those type of guys.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow, let's say, we'll call him Bryce Harper. Bryce Harper would have to convince everybody that, he's not, you almost would have to be a two-sport star, to be honest. It would have to be Bryce Harper, but he's able to play two sports, and people are convinced that if he doesn't get to go play for the team he wants, he's going to go to college, or he's going to go to the NFL, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And, let's say he'd have to convince people, that he wasn't going to sign unless it was one particular team. You'd also have to have the other teams get out of the way and let him fall to that team, which wouldn't necessarily happen because you might just have a team say, you know what, we get the pick back. We're going to take the guy. If he wants to play baseball, he'll play for us. But you have to have the guy fall, and then you're giving Bryce Harper, $8 million bonus at the end of the first round, and then you just say, well, screw it. Now we'll go crazy. But I still don't think you would just take the best player each round because, like in the scenario you laid, your research laid out, like, I like Blaine Enlow. Okay, I'd like Blaine Enlow in the second round. That'll cost me $2 million.
Mm-hmm.
But Tanner Burns in the third round. I mean, that'd be a good pick. But that's another. You're just going to start piling $2 million on top of $2 million. Eventually, you'll get down to maybe $1.5 million or $1 million. And a lot of these guys, the reason they're available is because they didn't get drafted till like the 30th round because their price tag was way too high. And I just like I said, it'd be nice to have all these guys who we kind of project. I mean, I think. After you get past the third round on this list, everybody's from 48 to 118 on our list. You're getting a bunch of nice mid-round talent, but it's not like you're getting, can't miss, front of the rotation, heart of the order type of guys.
And it almost kind of dovetails with what we were just talking about, right? Where the expected return on a normal draft, obviously you're increasing that a little bit by having a bunch of second and third round talents as opposed to fourth, fifth, sixth round talents, if that's such a thing. When the 30th best player in the draft is, or the 25th best player is Stephen Vogt, okay, you're increasing your chances of getting a middle reliever or a useful lineup piece. I guess is that worth $40 million? And it seems like diminishing returns financially before you even get into losing the first round picks.
Yeah, but I mean, you'd really be better off instead of spending $30 million on one draft, spending $10 million on 3 drafts in a row.
Right.
And like I said, I mean, and it's not a fully open market, but and plus, I mean, the other thing that would be tricky too is like this draft was considered somewhat of a mediocre draft. Like, maybe this wouldn't be the year you'd pick, but I mean, do you want to do that in a mediocre draft? It would be interesting, but like. It would be interesting. Well, we'll never remember to do this, but it would be interesting to look back on this, Chris, 10 years from now, and look at this list of this 20-round hypothetical best player available draft and see how many of these guys panned out.
Yeah, I've got it in my to-do list of things of when I'm supremely bored someday to go back using like a 2014 or 2013 list and see what you would have come up with. My guess is it wouldn't
want to go back earlier because the problem is most of the guys would have
that's true.
Gone to college,
right?
So you'd have to wait for them to kind of matriculate.
Well, it's funny because the impetus for that was that if the Red Sox had done this 3 years ago, they would have wound up with Jaron Kendall and David Peterson, who were both first-round picks this year. If they had just signed the guys they had drafted, but
yeah, but see, that's always kind of an asterisk too, though, because you can always play that game, and the Red Sox usually draft more of those guys than other teams do. Because I think the Red Sox, always take kind of backup plans in case, hey, somebody doesn't sign. Well, we'll go ahead and make a run at that guy. But they also took J.J. Matajevic, who's a high pick. And you mentioned Peterson Kendall. I've heard good things about Luis Alvarado. But here's the thing: if Jerry Kendall was signable, he would have been a third-round pick. I mean, people love that guy. He wasn't signable. If David Peterson. He had, I want to say, a broken leg right before the season, and that knocked him out a little bit. But if he was healthy and signable, he was a third-round pick. So, on one hand, they should have signed those guys. But you also, if they were signable, you wouldn't have gotten them both.
Yeah, and it's for every year that the guys you didn't sign turned into Carson Fulmer and Alex Bregman. There are years where they turned into Ryan Bolt or
right.
a number of guys who
and
didn't
like
quite
I said,
pan out.
it all comes down to if you're more aggressive about taking those guys,
Right.
then it's real easy to look back and be kind of heartbroken over it. I mean, the difference is under the old system, when you took the guys, you could sign whoever. And I didn't remember talking to Jason McLeod. And, the 2005 draft is funny because 2005 draft, they hit on their first 5 guys they took. Ellsbury, I mean, not all of them were as good as they hoped, but Ellsbury, Hansen, Buchholz, Lowry, Bowden. Okay, Hansen and Bowden were not much in the big leagues, but Ellsbury, Buchholz, and Lowry, I mean, that's a really good draft all by itself.
Sure.
And but like it's funny. I remember talking to Jason McLeod about it a few years after, and he said, "Yeah, but look, he remembered it for the guys they didn't sign. They didn't sign Pedro Alvarez, who they thought they had done, and Vanderbilt did a masterful job of re-recruiting him. Mm-hmm. They didn't sign Alan Dykstra, who wound up being a first-round pick. Also, they didn't sign Jason Castro, who wound up being a first-round pick. Also, they also were on. They would have taken Reese Havens over Jacoby Ellsbury, except Havens wouldn't agree to the number." And wound up going to South Carolina. He wound up being a first-round pick. Mm-hmm. And they were also on Justin Smoke, who they ultimately decided they weren't going to be able to sign, so they didn't take him. And Jason looked at that as like a bunch of missed opportunity. And that was really, they had a conversation with ownership and just said, look, we're identifying these guys. And ownership said, well, then start signing them. And they from that point on, going forward, from 2006 through 2011, before the bonus pool system came in 2012, I do think if you went and looked at what teams spent on the draft, the Red Sox spent far more money. Like if you sorted them by winning percentage, the Red Sox were never picking at the top of the draft and paying $4 or $5 million for a guy at the top of the first round, but they were still spending usually among the top 4 or 5 teams in draft spending, picking at the bottom of the first round and giving bonuses to other guys, and they were really great. I mean, I really did think the new system probably hurt the Red Sox as much as anybody, because I think they were a lot smarter than the other big market teams and said, shoot, if we put an extra $3 or $4 million into the draft, which in the course of baseball operations is not that much money, we can it was like basically like getting extra picks. If we're willing to put $3 million in, and let's say that they'll give us 3 extra $1 million players, well, that's like getting 3 extra picks, and you're stealing there. I mean, it just made a lot of sense. I mean, Josh Reddick was not even a big money guy, but Josh Reddick was a guy they got in the 17th round. Lars Anderson, who I thought was going to be really good, was a guy they overpaid late. Mm-hmm. And they did that for about I guess it was a 6-year period.
Right.
And it was smart. I always thought it was a smart way of doing business. And even if the guys didn't pan out in the big leagues, a lot of those guys they turned into trade value.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting that you give that anecdote, Jim, because that 06 draft was Ryan Callis, Josh Reddick, Lars Anderson, and they drafted but didn't sign Matt Laporta, and they drafted then a left-handed pitcher who they did as a true draft and follow, and Brandon Belt, who then went to his JUCO and realized he could
what's
hit.
Interesting about what's interesting about both those guys is Laporta they made a run at Laporta, but he was unsignable because he had a great sophomore year and a great senior year, and he was hurt as a junior, and he had Boris as an agent, and he still wanted basically to get paid like a first rounder.
Right.
So they tried to get him, and he wouldn't come down. Belt, the problem with Belt was that was year I want to say that was year the Cubs had a first round pick. And they didn't have picks in rounds 2, 3, and 4. They took Tyler Colvin in the first round, and if I got my year right, that was the year they took Jeff Samardzija in the 5th round. But teams across baseball were ticked off because the Cubs didn't have 2nd, 3rd, or 4th round picks, and there were no bonus pools then. They were basically promising the world to a ton of players, like, hey, if you fall to us in whatever round, we'll go crazy on you and we'll pay you. Well, Brandon Belt was one of those guys, and I think it screwed up the signability for the Red Sox. They made him a pretty generous offer, but the Cubs had promised him more, even though they didn't draft him, and it screwed that one up too. So even that year, I sound like I'm making excuses now, the 2 names who jump out as guys they didn't sign, there were kind of extenuating circumstances on that.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. That was the Tyler Cove and Jeff Samardzija year. And interestingly enough, they drafted Jeremy Papelbon, one of John Papelbon's younger brother. Excellent. Well, Jim, as always, that stuff at the end there was for someone who's been doing this as long as I have, or I guess not as long as I have in relative terms, but hearing these kind of anecdotes and bits of knowledge that come off the top of your head is always just awe-inspiring and wonderful to sit and hear. So I thank you for coming on. We look forward to making you a member of the Five Timers Club at some point, hopefully in the not too distant future.
I got to beat Alex. I got to beat Alex.
You do. So. I'm gonna tell him you said that too, and I'm sure he can be very feisty when he gets angry too. So I hear. So we'll see how he reacts to that. But Jim, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much. Thank you for being understanding with some scheduling issues we had before we started recording. But it's always a pleasure, my friend. And best to you. And congratulations again. I said this off air, or I guess an email. But congratulations to your son who recently graduated from BU, which is a great accomplishment. And best of luck to you and your family going forward, man.
No, I appreciate it, Chris. And he was even in, unbeknownst to us, David Ortiz was getting an honorary degree from BU that same weekend.
Oh, that's right.
Even a little Red Sox action there. But no, and like I think I said at the beginning of the podcast, or maybe it was off air, but I love the website. You guys are so detailed. I can't tell you how many times there'll be some, at least to me, obscure Red Sox guy, and I don't even Google his name. I Google Sox prospects in his name because I figure you guys will have something on him, and I'm never disappointed. So I just wish it would make my job a lot easier. I wish there were 29 more sites that were the equivalent of Sox prospects, just with the extent you guys go and how well connected and how good the information is.
Well, if you can figure out a way for me to do this full time, I'm happy to open the other 29 franchises, and we'll leave it at that. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Jim. We'll have you back soon.
Okay, that sounds good. Thanks, Chris.
All right. Well, thank you to Jim for joining us. I should have mentioned this at the top, but Jim and I recorded that on Monday night, the 19th, following the draft. Some scheduling issues have kept us from getting this out until now, so I should mention that in the meantime, the Red Sox have signed three more draftees in addition to Jordan Wren and Tanner Nishioka. They signed 8th rounder Zach Sterry, first baseman out of Oakland University. Sterry, Nishioka, and Wren all signed for $5,000, Jim reported, as well as 21st rounder Lucas Young, junior right-handed pitcher out of Mobile, went to college there. Big news, though, was that Tanner Houck has signed. That's news today on the 21st of October. I'm already thinking of October, folks. 21st of June. First-rounder Tanner Houck signed for exactly slot for the number 24 pick. That's $2,614,500 if you're keeping score at home. So the Red Sox are going to have some money to play with to sign guys like Alex Scherff, who we discussed, Cole Brannen, the second-rounder, who knows whether he'll need maybe over slot or not. Hopefully he'll sign for slot, but you never know. Or whether some of that money might go to some of the guys that Jim mentioned, like Aaron Perry, Garrett, Benge, or maybe even a Donny Diaz. So who knows? But at any rate, we'll have to wait to see, and it'll be exciting to follow. So thank you all for downloading again. My name's Chris. For Ian, who's not here, we want to thank you for listening, and we'll be back at you soon. Keep an eye on Twitter and on SoxProspects.com for all of the info. Thanks, everybody.